I want you to say something utopian about the future that you think progressives should build.
I believe technology can dramatically transform human life for the better. Dramatically. I think it can make possible ways of living. I think it can solve problems that we take as completely inevitable and totally for granted. I think that we should be able to deliver dramatic changes to public infrastructure quickly. I think we should be able to build things. And I think when the government promises you something, from high-speed rail to a subway extension to a national electric vehicle charger network, that thing should emerge. It should be gleaming. It should happen quickly. It should be like, oh my fucking God, the government did that. And I think that one of the central failures of progressivism is it has not admitted it did this, but it has lost faith in what the government itself can do.
So we found that biology actually stores set points or morphological goals, and we can rewrite those goals. And that cells are basically a collective intelligence, not just your neural cells, like we all know that's a collective intelligence that helps make you, but all cells can make a collective intelligence that can reach certain kinds of goals. And you can rewrite those goals, which is amazing, because what we found is that those goals are encoded bioelectrically. Looking backwards, not such a shock, because, you know, this is how our brains work. Turns out that's a much more ancient system. So we can do things like you take a flatworm, and the flatworm is regenerative. So you cut it into pieces, and every piece makes one head, one tail, very reliably, and you get your worm back. So it turns out that if you look, there's a bioelectrical memory in the tissues that tell you how many heads a worm is supposed to have. And we can rewrite that memory without touching the DNA. This is not about the hardware. This is not about the genetic hardware. This is about the memories that guide the problem-solving intelligence of the cells. And you say to those cells with a interface that we worked out, no, actually a good worm should have 2 heads. And then guess what they build? They build 2 heads. And now it's super cool. You can cut it into pieces, and those pieces will forever, as far as we can tell, it's been, 20 years that we've been doing this, those pieces will continue to make 2-headed worms.
Oh, so if you have a 2-headed worm and you cut that one into 2, then the part will continue to make 2-headed worms.
Correct. That lineage, you have now made a lineage of 2-headed worms that will forever be 2-headed worm.
Everybody probably saw the glow-in-the-dark pigs that they created by using certain genes from phosphorin animals and then putting them into the pigs. And so we're already seeing little versions of chimera. You've probably seen these weird images of people growing, like, let's say, ears on rats and like all this kind of strange stuff that is happening. And so it was inevitable that it would come to the actual creation of a chimera. Just like as the world lays itself out, on the edge of the world, there are monsters. There are things that don't fit into categories.
And if you look back to ancient Greece, you find something strikingly similar. Bougonia was a practice that sought to spontaneously generate new life from the corpses of animals, very commonly bees or wasps from cow carcasses. You'd prepare the vessel through various means, such as filling it with things like honey and flowers, and then plugging up all the orifices, and then you'd leave the treated corpse in a dark, sealed place for some time. Eventually, when you open it back up, ta-da! There will be new life. Plato's Book of the Cow describes such a process, but used to produce a rational animal from human sperm rather than something like bees from honey. Equally gross, even a touch more brutal depending on your outlook, but also equally fascinating.
We've shown that certain kinds of birth defects, and this is in animal models, this is not in humans yet, but we're going hopefully to the clinic at some point, we can repair certain really nasty kinds of birth defects by reminding the cells, again through this bioelectric interface, reminding the cells what is the pattern that they're supposed to be building. So we can override certain kinds of birth defects. We can create new organs where they don't belong. So we've made tadpoles with eyes in their guts and things like this, where you can say to the cells, build an eye. And this is important. When we do this, we don't micromanage the genes. We don't micromanage the cells. We figured out a message that says, build an eye here. And the reason that works is because we're dealing with an agential material. It's a material that I don't have to be, as an engineer, I don't have to be in charge of everything. It has competencies. All I'm doing is plugging into those competencies. And if I can speak the language that it understands, and if I'm convincing, because that's a key part of this, you have to convince the material. This is not, there's ways that it will ignore you. If you do it wrong, it'll ignore you. So you have to be convincing, and then you say, build an eye here, that's what it'll do. It'll build an eye.
But the first known appearance of the homunculus by name appeared in the works of the 16th century scholar Paracelsus. He gives us, by far, the most complete picture. Throughout his writings, he describes a great variety of homunculi and practices surrounding them. Some of the ideas appear to be very sporadic and at times even contradictory, but he does provide a useful taxonomy, particularly in his works De Homunculus et Monstris, Vom Lagenleben, and De Natura Rerum. According to him, there are three primary types of homunculi. First, we have the more innocuous magical homunculus, which is more of a symbol than anything. He describes it as a doll or a mommet made from earth, wax, or metal as a simulacra of a living person. It can then be used magically to protect or harm that person, much like a voodoo doll. There is a variety of applications for this, but suffice it to say he saw this as a very spiritual thing, a good way to manipulate one's own soul in the physical space. Next, more in line with preformation theory and more mythological sounding by a mile, we have the pathological homunculus. These are monsters. Think of a basilisk or a cockatrice and you're on the right track. They're produced through what Paracelsus viewed as an unnatural or impure exposure of human seed. Essentially, if it ends up anywhere other than the uterus or the appropriate alchemical apparatus, it will turn into a monster. Quote, whatever the air touches is no longer seed, but a material of homunculus. And finally, the one you've probably been waiting for, and the one that initially drew me to this topic all those years ago, the alchemical homunculus. The artificial little person in the glass jar.
And I guess the final thing I'll mention, we've done induction of regeneration, so allow animals that don't regenerate to grow their legs back. And we've made some synthetic life forms that are made of living cells, but in a form and function that has never existed on Earth before. These are some of the things that we work on.
My view is that we should respect personal autonomy and personal liberty and use technology to allow us to extend our life. For example, there are many things which are not natural that we are grateful for. Wearing glasses is not natural, but if we said that we would only take our bodies the way they were naturally born, we would be condemning millions of people to have a blurry view of the world, and I think we'd all agree that would be horrible. So thank goodness for glasses, thank goodness for artificial hearts, thank goodness for artificial knees, and thank goodness for technological immortality.
C.S. Lewis's critique of scientific utopianism was at the heart of his novel That Hideous Strength, which tells the story of a conspiracy to transform England into a scientific dictatorship. The conspiracy is led by a government bureaucracy with the deceptively innocuous name of the National Institute of Coordinated Experiments, or NICE.
I think that Hideous Strength and Huxley's Brave New World are the two greatest dystopias in our language in the 20th century.
The agenda of NICE in That Hideous Strength reads like a wish list drawn up by the era's leading scientific social reformers. It included sterilization of the unfit, selective breeding, biochemical conditioning, experimentation on both animals and criminals, and above all, truly scientific planning.
A scientific planning that is pretending to provide a new humanity that is doing away with traditional ethics, that is doing away with all traditional restraints.
That's the point he's making, is that the machine, and this is what he refers to as the machine, because in his mind, it's not just a social class, but a kind of ideological, sort of movement and outlook. It has a lot to do with things that are coming out of the Enlightenment, and sort of the political and economic expressions of it, particularly when it comes to efficiency, and management and control. right?
Well, that was
yeah, and these people are in the way. These people are in the way and we can't really honor their rights or their desires because they're so stupid they don't know what's really in their own best interest.
Yeah.
We're going to do it to them.
Lewis depicts a world in that hideous strength in which nothing is sacred. Daniel Bell has told us that the essence of modernity is that nothing is sacred. In The Abolition of Man and also in that hideous strength, we see the consequences of a world in which nothing is sacred, which includes the human person. The human person's not sacred. And when that happens, there are no distinctions between individuals or humans and animals or humans and vegetables or humans and minerals. And we have the kind of thing we've had in the 20th century.
Of whether or not we are machines or not, to me, is a kind of artificial question. I mean, there are flesh machines and there are non-flesh machines. Anything that consists of moving parts and organized processes is some kind of a machine. I remember a great line from the film Guess Who's Coming to Dinner, where Sidney Poitier is arguing with his father over his desire to be in an interracial marriage. And his father says, "This is horrible. This would be illegal in half the states in the United States." This was in the 1960s. And Sidney Poitier gets very angry with his father and says, "Dad, I love you, but the problem with you is you see yourself as a colored person. I see myself as a person." I believe in the next decade or two, this same argument is going to be repeated many times, that people say, the problem with you is you see yourself as a flesh person. I see myself as a person.
I mean, here I'll tell you why I think it's frightening. Because it is frightening. It's frightening because it places the responsibility on us. I think that when people ask me, well, what are you most scared of? And it's not that the Xenobots will eat us all. It's that we will fail to rise to the level of intelligence and wisdom that are needed to address these issues that have plagued us forever. That is what's frightening to me. Is that it's not a foregone conclusion that we can do it, and it places the responsibility on us, and it means that we are, in an important sense, the adults in the room, responsible, all of us, responsible for relieving the level of suffering and for solving the meaning crisis. I think that's absolutely critical.
In the 2 decades before his death, Lewis became increasingly alarmed by the rise of scientific authoritarianism.
Lewis was very concerned by the dogmatic use of science, and that is why he wrote his novel, That Hideous Strength. That is why he wrote his book, The Abolition of Man, where he actually worries and somewhat sort of predicts the rise of a new class of people, of experts speaking in the name of science, who would dictate to everyone else. In fact, by the end of his life, Lewis was worrying about the rise of what he called scientocracy. Government and society that claims to be based on the claims of modern science, but in reality really is based on a scientific clique of a few people who are speaking in the name of science. And maybe they are adopting the majority view of science, but they're claiming the right to rule based on their scientific knowledge and expertise.
And the case of the general talk of progress is indeed an extreme one. As enunciated today, 1905, 120 years ago, the problem remains with us. Progress is simply a comparative of which we have not settled the superlative. I thought that was an extremely sharp insight while we're getting better. And that is true because, often I'll talk about dead reckoning, that we're just sort of, we don't have a clear sense of the destination, but we're just sort of feeling our way there. And so we do this and we sense progress and we think, okay, well, this is, we're making progress. But Chesterton says, well, do you know the good that you are pursuing? And if you don't know the good that you're pursuing, how then can you know whether in fact you are making progress? We meet every ideal of religion, patriotism, beauty, or brute pleasure with the alternative ideal of progress. That is to say, we meet every proposal of getting something that we know about with an alternative proposal of getting a great deal more of nobody knows what.
Knowing, say, how things work, knowing how cells work or knowing how ecosystems work doesn't tell you what you ought to do for your society. Because public policy is not just about the technical expertise of how things work. It's about what good is worth having at what price. And as C.S. Lewis pointed out, on these questions, a scientific training gives you no added value. Scientists are not moral philosophers, yet political and social judgments involve not just how do things work and how can we make them work better, but how should we act, and what's worth spending money on, and what's worth doing, and what freedoms are worth giving up or not. And on these sorts of moral and ethical questions, someone's science training doesn't give them the right to dictate to the rest of society.
With regenerative medicine, with personalized medicine, now that we have the DNA decoded, we are able to reprogram the DNA molecule that governs every aspect of our body, our health and our illness, to give us only health. And people have an unlimited amount of desire and willpower to extend their life. This desire and willpower will be channeled into economic forces to propel biotechnology until we achieve, well before the end of this century, the death of death.
And, I understand, the ancient texts warn about certain things. The one thing I haven't really, and this could just be me, maybe they exist, I'm not a scholar of that stuff, so I don't know. The one thing I haven't seen, or maybe they did exist and got suppressed for specific reasons, is whether any of these things warn of the dangers of the status quo.
Leading the movement into new ways of looking at old knowledge was the German physician Paracelsus. Born in Germany in 1493, Paracelsus trained in traditional medicine but also studied alchemy. Ultimately, forced out of school for challenging the status quo, he embarked on a nomadic life supporting himself with astrology readings.
Like where are the ancient texts that say, look around, are you seeing all this stuff? Don't let it sit like this. Do something, learn. And let's get past this. Does that exist?
Mike, I would put it to you that the axial revolution was a significant change from the Bronze Age, in which the status quo was taken as the normative, and the axial revolution said, no, the status quo is somehow fallen or decadent or illusory or filled with foolishness and violence, and we need to transcend it. And it brought about a totally different conception of wisdom.
I think
Ray, I think we all have to be very skeptical about people who say that there are limits to what people can do. Human beings are the species that transcend their limits. And it was just a few decades ago that people said that humans would never break the sound barrier, that humans would not break into outer space. And it's the same thing with technological immortality. It's just a concept that thousands of teams of people throughout the world are working on. And I'm quite confident that we'll be able to transcend the barrier of disease and old age before the end of this century.
Now, we have this outdated software that runs inside our bodies. It evolved thousands of years ago. Things were a little bit different then. The fat insulin receptor gene says, hold on to every calorie because you don't know where the next calorie is coming from. That was a good idea 1,000 years ago. RNA interference just emerged a few years ago. We can turn genes off, and there are 1,000 medications in the pipeline using that. Gene therapy, where we add new genes, has been around for a long time. So your company has been pioneering a new approach to gene therapy. Could you talk about that?
Sure. The United Therapeutics approach to gene therapy is to take advantage of the fact that a replacement gene automatically finds its right spot within the 3 billion base pairs that make up our DNA. It's a magical property of the DNA, and it's almost as if nature is inviting us to help fix its bugs in its code. So we take some circulating progenitor stem cells from an individual out of their bloodstream via just extracting their blood, and we spin it down until we have just the endothelial progenitor stem cells. We transfect those stem cells with a corrected gene, re-inject them back into the person's body via simple injection, and those stem cells find their ways to the parts of the body where they normally reside and produce the protein products directed by the genes that we've inserted into them.
So what do you see as some of the most promising biotechnology opportunities, things that are really on the cusp that could overcome these major sources of aging and disease?
I think the most important technologies in the biomedical field are those that relate to regenerative medicine, because ultimately it's important for us to be able to replace body parts in a way that's recognized by our immune system as being self. So the work that's going on in immunology, as well as the work that's going on in stem cell technology, are the twin pillars that will support an indefinite lifespan for human beings.
Away with all your moral formulae. I am for progress. This logically stated means, let us not settle what is good, but let us settle whether or not we are getting more of it. He says, neither in religion nor morality, my friend, lie the hopes of the race, but in education. And when I was listening to this in audiobook form, and I heard that, I thought, oh my goodness, yes.
That's very interesting. And I have this fantasy looking forward. Assuming we all make it, which is also not a foregone conclusion, but assuming we all make it, I look forward to a class in school where the young kids learn about us the way that we learn about cavemen when we read that, oh my God, you used to step on a sharp stick and get sepsis and die, and that was the end of that. And they would learn about us, and they would say, wait a minute, you're telling me these people, they would have to live their whole life in whatever body they randomly got at birth? So they just got, some random cosmic ray would hit their embryonic cells, and they would be crippled, or they would have, whatever their limitations of IQ or whatever. They would just have to stay in that body, and there was nothing they could do about it. And they would, they would have to kill other things to eat just to survive. Like, these are all crazy. These are a mature species. Shouldn't be doing any of this. And I feel like if, in the future, when they look back, this is going to seem ridiculous. It's going to seem crazy that our lives and the meaning and the achievements of our lives would be limited to things that we had absolutely no control over because we didn't know what to do. We didn't, the cells seem to poop out after 80 or 90 years. We don't know what to do, and that's it. That's just how we were born, and that's how we stayed. Yeah. To me, this is gonna seem the kids aren't even gonna believe that this is how we lived our lives.
In a world driven by science and technology,
we need to always go beyond normal human capabilities because that's our nature as human beings. Human beings are the species that transcend their limitations. It's wonderful that we do because thanks to those transcendence of our limitations, we now have beautiful music, amazing art, we're able to travel the globe, we're able to relieve pain and suffering for millions of people. One more limitation is the unfortunate loss of all of an individual's knowledge and goodness with the degradation of their body. If there was no other way to avoid it, we'd have to accept it. And that's what all of religion has been about for the past several millennium, is teaching us to accept that. Thanks to science and technology, we're now at the cusp of transcending that limitation. And it's nothing to be fearful for. It's something we should grab for with both arms and welcome the transcendence of this last human limitation, the limitation of illness, disability, and death.
Lewis did not accept the idea that science was a special form of knowledge that was somehow immune to inspection, that was somehow cordoned off from the non-specialist assessing the deliverances of the sciences. Lewis was well aware that, first of all, that there's no such thing as science as such. There are sciences, and each science has its particular methods and its particular areas of study, and also that the sciences, to be good, need to interact with one another, but they do so by means of the larger tools of good, rational, critical thinking. And so that the things that the scientists say are subject to review by everyone who is able to think well, to think critically, to think rationally.
Lewis did not deny that scientific expertise might be necessary for good public policy in many areas, but he insisted that science alone was not sufficient.
You need something else in the horizon besides saying we're going to be inclusive and we're going to get rich together with flying cars. You need to say, so that we can live in some specific way that we are supposed to live. What is that way, Ezra Klein? How then shall we live?
My friend, I am a liberal. I actually believe in creating a space for liberal individual flourishing of different kinds.
We're fond of talking about progress. That is a dodge to avoid discussing what is good. We are fond of talking about education. That is a dodge of avoiding discussing what is good. The modern man says, let us leave all these arbitrary standards and embrace liberty. This is logically rendered, let us not decide what is good, but let it be considered good not to decide.
People are already talking about how the danger of doing that is it's like you're creating a lower form of being that will somehow be akin to you, but not completely. So you can imagine like the creation of orcs or these monsters out of the ground. This is what is actually happening. And so people will say, well, it's just an embryo, it's just a fetus, it's not a complete person. First of all, the fact that they're telling this publicly means that they've done a lot of other things in private before letting this out publicly. So there might be things out there that we're not aware of, because if they're willing to show this to us in public, then there are other things going on as well. And the narrative will play itself out. This is one of the things that I tried to bring up, is that once you start a certain series of events, once you engage in a story, then that story is going to play itself out. The characters might change. The people who embody the characters might change. And so yes, this scientist that maybe made the monkey human embryo will not necessarily be the one to go all the way and bring this being into the world in terms of, being born. Then it doesn't matter, because you've opened up a space and then someone else is going to go into that space. And then when you open up that space, then someone else is going to go into the other space. These things just will, once you create a possibility, someone will come and inhabit that possibility.
Apparently, the first century religious figure Simon Magus boasted of his own type of homunculus, which he said not only made him like God, but more powerful than God because he created his from air, which, quote, was a thing more difficult than creating him of earth. In the 18th century, with the help of the Italian cleric Abbe Gelane, Count Johann Ferdinand von Kufstein was rumored to have created 10 homunculi with the ability to see the future. He kept them in glass containers at his Masonic lodge in Vienna, where dignitaries and people of renown would visit to see them. He called them the scrying ghosts. In Plato's Book of the Cow, which I mentioned a little earlier, the homunculus you're instructed to create is supposedly capable of prophecy, able to tell its creator of all things that are absent, whatever that means, and if you vivisect it, you can get your hands on all kinds of mystical components, including fluid that will allow you to walk on water. So, a lot of potential for power here, if you're into that.
There will be the intoxication of power. Always, at every moment, there will be the thrill of victory, the sensation of trampling on an enemy who is helpless. If you want a picture of the future, imagine a boot stamping on a human face forever. The moral,
to be drawn from this dangerous nightmare situation is a simple one. Don't let it happen. It depends on you.